Welcome back, guys. As we are approaching the end of 2021, I wanted to give you guys a quick throwback to what exactly happened to spousal sponsorship applications submitted during this year. Therefore, I did a poll asking you guys on what exactly you'd like me to make my next video on, and apparently most of you voted the highest to this particular topic, so here we go. Your request has been accepted with thanks. And my apologies for taking too long to prepare this video, as I had conducted a survey with different applicants based on a particular month they submitted their file in. So it just took a little bit of time gathering all the information and presenting it in a simple and understandable format for you guys. Please note that I'll be covering information about the outlined applications submitted in the year of 2021. So if you guys applied in early or mid 2020, well, most of you would have already received your decision by now and wouldn't be even watching this video. Therefore, we can clearly focus on the application submitted from the beginning of 2021, that is January, all the way to the month of September. I wouldn't go any further than that because those applications will be considered fairly new. So if you applied in any of these months, this could be an informative video for you guys in giving you an idea on where your application should exactly be right now. Please note the data has been taken from around 100 applicants for each month who has been inputting their data on a regular basis, all the way from receiving their first AOR, which is the acknowledgement of receipt, all the way to the PPR, which is the passport request. And in today's video, I will be overviewing each of these months starting from the January of 2021 till the month of September 2021 and kind of have an idea about where they stand right now. For all the December 2020 applicants, you can pretty much analyze your application with the January 2021, as it is not too much differentiating and can be easily mixed and matched. So without any further ado, let's get started. And make sure to watch the whole video because that will be the only way to compare the timeline of your month with the rest of the months. So skipping the video back and forth wouldn't really help. So make sure you stick to the end. And also a tip for you guys, you can turn on the subtitles of this video by clicking right here, which will make it even more understandable for you. Alright, let's start our video with the month of January. In the early months of 2021, the things had started to pick up a little bit, and that is around the time when my wife's application was fully finalized, and that is also the time when a lot of the January applicants had also received their first AOR in a matter of couple of weeks. If you compare this to my application submitted in April 2020, it took me 6 long months to be able to get my first AOR. So talking about the applicants of this particular month, looks like it still took some applicants around 2 months to be able to see their first AOR. And remember, this data that I took my analysis from is only based on a sample provided by around 100 applicants. Going further, it took an average of 5 days for these applicants from the date of receipt of their AOR to receive their sponsor approval, whereas some received it within a month, while for some applicants it took around more than 2 months to receive their sponsor approval letter. There was also an applicant who received their essay letter 4 long months after receiving their first AOR. So what we can conclude from this is that every sponsor has a unique and different circumstances, which is why there has been such a wide gap between all these applicants. The reason could either be not enough income proofs or lack of evidences that supports their relationship with the applicant. So make sure to take this step very seriously, as a lot of people tend to get stuck at this stage. Moving further, it took the applicants an average of around 2 days to see a biometrics instruction letter in their inbox, basically because it's an automatic thing, while some applicants received this letter before their sponsor approval, while some received it after. Whereas there were also very few applicants who received their BIL in between 15 to 40 days from the date of receipt of their sponsored approval. Later on, the circumstances tend to change a little bit, where every applicant has a different timeline based on when they were able to book their biometrics appointment to when it showed as passed on their ECAS account. But just for the sake of a number, we can say that it took them around an average of 10 days from the receipt of this letter to showing status as passed on their account. There were a couple applicants as well who were not supposed to give their biometrics, as they were exempt. Moving ahead, a majority of these applicants received their medical request letter within a week of receiving their BIL, while for a couple applicants it took a bit longer, say more than 2 months. And just like biometrics, the completion of medicals also depend upon the booking availability, which is why every applicant has a different timeline. So here's my advice for you all. Usually the CSE sends out both the biometrics and medicals request around the same time, so make sure you're booking yourself an appointment as soon as possible. This is only going to benefit you and make your application processing even faster. So as per my data, a lot of the January applicants completed their medicals within 10 to 20 days from the receipt of request, and the results were updated on their account within a week for a majority of the applicants. Now comes the next stage, where the status showed application received again on the account, which simply meant that the application has entered the next stage, where it is further transferred to their respective visa offices for additional processing like background check and all that stuff. Now here, completely depending on the scenario, Some applications were sent to the applicant's home country, whereas some were processed here in Ottawa, Canada. Now, a lot of people say that if your application is further processed within Canada, you have higher chances of approval as opposed to the ones that are sent back home. Well, to some extent it is true, but not the approval part. The reason that I believe behind sending an application back home is something related to the background of the applicant. If the CSE thinks that a particular applicant needs additional background verification, it is transferred over to the outline visa office, while some are retained within Canada that needs less verification. My wife's application was further processed in Ottawa, but that may or may not be the reason how it got processed within a month. It totally depends upon the workload of the applicant's local visa office. There are many offices that are way faster than Ottawa, so just don't panic, and when you realize your application has been sent outside Canada, just hope for the best and make sure to keep following up on your application. Now, getting back to the topic, a lot of applications seem to have been transferred to the visa office about a month after the applicants received their biometrics and medicals request. Based on the data, a few applicants received their AOR2 email a couple days after passing medicals, while for some the status simply showed we are processing your background check on their online account. Moving further, about 70 to 80% of the applicants had received their pre-arrival letter on an average of around 6 months from the day their application was received by CSE, which I believe is a very good timeline. After that, a lot of applicants who received their pre-arrival in July received their passport request in a matter of days, whereas for some it took around 20 to 30 days to receive their PPR email in their inbox. And then the later stages you already know about, that is the COPR and lending. And yes, 95% of those who submitted their data did not receive any interview request. So if we summarize and pick a conclusion for the January applicants, very large quantity of applicants have had their decision made within 6 months, more or less. Now let's talk about the February applicants. A majority of these applicants received their first AOR on an average of 35 days after application was successfully delivered at the CSE office, with a few exceptions from US, Hong Kong, China, and Australia, where it took around 2 to 3 months for their first AOR. Moving forward, it took an average of 17 days for these applicants to receive their sponsored approval letter, where a majority of these applicants received it within 30 days, whereas for a couple applicants, it took more than 3 months. Next, these applicants received their biometrics instruction letter, and as usual, just like the previous month, they also received it within a day or two, with just 1 or 2 exceptions of 20 days. Later on, a majority of these applicants had their biometrics shown as passed within an average span of 10 days. For medicals request, although a majority of the applicants received it along with their biometrics request, a few of them received it within a month or 2 after passing their biometrics, which is not much to worry about. Later on, each applicant carried out their exam and took an average of 15 days to complete it. And to our surprise, the CSE also updated the application status to medicals passed within an average of 8 days. Now comes the next and the most important stage, where the application is further transferred to a visa office for additional processing. Based on the data, about 95% of the applicants' files had already been transferred over to the VO in advance before they even received their medicals request. Some of these files were transferred about 2 to 3 months in advance, while very few were transferred shortly after passing medicals, and they received their AOR2 email accordingly. We can see at this time that the visa offices were at their full throttle. After that, moving on to the pre-arrival stage, though I don't have a lot of data on this one, but based on all the info that I have, it took the applicants around 2 to 5 months to receive their pre-arrival letter from the day their file was moved to the VOs, while some received their decision made right away. And after that, it was just a matter of time where the applicants received their passport request within a time period of 10 to 25 days, the average being 9 days, which is pretty fast. To summarize the timeline for February applicants, we can say that the PPRs were issued within 150 to 250 days from the date of application received, which I think is a very good number. Now let's talk about the March applicants. For this month, the calculations will be based on the data from around 200 applicants. A majority of these applicants received their first AOR within 30 to 50 days, with the average being 37 days after the application was successfully delivered at the CSE office. Moving forward, it took an average of 15 days for these applicants to receive their sponsored approval letter. A majority of the applicants received it within the first 10 days, whereas for a very few applicants, it took more than a month. Next, these applicants received their BIL, and just like the month of February, most of the March applicants also received it within a day or two, with 1 or 2 exceptions of 20 days or more, which is quite usual. Later on, a majority of these applicants had their biometrics shown as passed on an average span of 28 days. Now again, please do not be overwhelmed by this data and start panicking on why is your biometrics not passed or why is it taking too long. Remember, this totally depends upon the booking availability as well as how early you're able to submit your biometrics. Moving on to the medical stage, I see a majority of the applicants receive their medical request around 15 days on an average after receiving their BIL. However, for a few of them, it took more than a month. Later on, each applicant carried out their exam depending upon their availability and took an average of 20 days to complete it. And luckily, CSE also updated the application status to medicals passed within an average span of 12 days. Now comes the next stage, which is the application transfer stage for additional processing. Based on the data, a majority of the files had already been transferred over to the VO a couple weeks after they received the BIL, or you can say much before they even received their medicals request, while some were transferred a couple days after the medicals. The proportion of both these types of transfers was kind of similar, with 50% of it happening before medicals and 50% after, and later on they received their AOR2 email as well accordingly. After that, moving on to the pre-arrival stage, even though a lot of the March applicants did not receive a pre-arrival letter at all, but whosoever did receive it was between a time frame of 20 to 150 days, which is a bit longer than usual. However, a majority of the applicants were able to see their decision made on their profile about 70 days after their application was received by the second processing visa office. Whereas for a few applicants, it took around 3 to 4 months for decision made to show up on their profile. And now the only thing left was a passport request, which was received in under 5 to 10 days by a majority of the applicants, along with some lucky applicants receiving it a month before the decision made even showed up on their profile. To summarize the timeline for the March applicants, we can say that the PPRs were issued on an average within 170 days from the date of application received, which I think is very much similar to the February timeline. So looks like the CSE has been going on consistently over here. Alright, now let's talk about the April applicants. So as per the data, it took an average of 38 days for these applicants to receive their first AOR, with the longest time taken by an Indian applicant, that is around 4 months, while some applicants, including Indians, received it within 30 to 40 days. The next comes the sponsor approval letter, and surprisingly, the average time taken by this stage was only 4 days. Isn't it great? Well, compare that to my application that took more than 6 months for this letter. Next, these applicants received their biometrics instruction letter automatically, which took less than a day, with a couple exceptions of around 28 days. Basically, the results were pretty much just like the previous 2 months. Moving ahead, majority of the applicants were able to give their biometrics under an average of 24 days, and the results were immediately updated on their account. Moving on to the medicals, a lot of the applicants received their medicals request a couple days after receiving their BIL, on an average of 9 days. Later on, the tests were given and the results were updated on the account within around 7 days time. Now comes the next stage, where the application is further transferred to a visa office for additional processing. Based on the data, I saw a lot of the US and UK applications were transferred to their home country a couple weeks in advance before the applicants got their medicals request, whereas 50% of the applicants from the rest of the countries had their applications transferred to either Ottawa or their home country over a month after medicals, while applications of the other half were transferred almost the same day they received their medicals request. However, not a lot of these applicants received an AOR2 email. After that, moving on to the pre-arrival stage, I see the applicants received their PA email about 69 days on average after their file was moved over to their associated visa offices. And talking about the decision made, a lot of the applicants were able to see it on their account almost the same day they received their pre-arrival email, or you can say it took an average of 7 days. And shortly after that, or let's say on an average of 2 days, applicants received their PPR. Hence, for this particular month, to my surprise, looks like the average timeline was similar to the previous months, which is an average of 171 days. Perhaps CSE has yet been going on consistent for another month on their processing potential so far. Now let's talk about the May applicants. A majority of these applicants received their first AOR in between 35 to 60 days, the average being 50 days, whereas very less applicants took close to 100 days to receive their first AOR, with 117 days being the longest time taken by an Indian applicant. Moving forward, it took an average of 9 days for these applicants to receive their sponsor approval letter. However, the time gap among these applicants has been very wide, with some applicants receiving it in between 10 to 20 days, while some taking as long as 70 to 90 days. But rest assured, the amount of people who received it within the first 10 days was much higher than the rest of the applicants. Next comes the biometrics instruction letter, which has the same data as before. A high number of applicants received it in a couple days before or after receiving their sponsor approval, but very few received it right after they received their AOR1. Moving on to the medicals request, although a majority of the applicants received it within 5 days of their biometrics, there were almost the same number of applicants who got this request after around 50 to 90 days, with 13 days being the total average time taken. Now talking about the application transfer, The data reveals that the files were moved to their visa offices around 16 days in advance of applicants receiving their medicals request, where for some applicants it was moved 50 to 80 days in advance, that is close to the sponsor approval stage. Some received this transfer info a couple days after they passed their medicals, but mainly speaking, almost everyone's application was transferred in advance before CSE issued out the medical request letters. However, out of the data submitted by 150 people, only 15 to 16 people had the opportunity to see the AOR2 email in their IRCC account, and that took an average of 30 days time. After that, moving on to the pre-arrival stage, it shows that majority of the applicants who didn't receive their AOR2 email actually received a pre-arrival letter around 51 days after their file was moved over to the visa office, which is a bit better indication than the month of April, where the average was 69 days. And after that, talking about the passport request, quite a few number of people have been issued this so far. Mainly the applicants who received their pre-arrival letter first. For some, it came within 20 days, whereas some were issued PPRs as long as 3 months after they received their pre-arrival. But a large proportion of the May applicants are still stuck at one or the other stage right now. Now let's talk about the June applicants. A majority of these applicants received their first AOR on an average of 66 days after application received at the CSE office, with a couple exceptions from the ones taking more than 100 days. Moving forward to the sponsor approval stage, majority of the applicants received their essay letter within 5 to 15 days, with the average being 10 days. Next, these applicants received their biometrics instruction letter, just like the previous months, and that is within 1 to 5 days in advance of receiving their essay letter. Or you can say a large number of applicants received it a couple days after their application was successfully delivered to the CSE office. Moving on to the medicals request, although a majority of the applicants received it along with their biometrics request, a few of them received it way over after 40 days, along with some even taking around 5 months to see this in their account. So basically, the results were sort of mixed for this particular stage. Now comes the application transfer stage. Based on the data, around 50% of the applications were moved well over 40 days in advance to their respective visa offices. It means that these applications were first moved to the VOs, and only after that were the medical request letters issued. Whereas some applications were transferred a couple days after passing the medicals. And apparently, only a handful of applicants actually received an AOR2 email. Talking about the pre-arrival stage, the data shows that those who did not receive an AOR2 actually received the pre-arrival email around 40 to 70 days after the date their application was moved over to the visa offices. However, the number of applicants who received it is very low, which means that a lot of the June applications are still not fully finalized. And after that, the ones who did receive a pre-arrival were able to see a passport request in their account around 40 to 50 days after. But again, that number is very low, which means a huge number of the June applications are still stuck at one or the other stage. Now let's talk about the July applicants. So for this month, mostly all the applicants received their first AOR between 50 to 70 days, with the average being 62 days. Moving forward to the sponsor approval stage, it took an average of 9 days for these applicants to receive their essay letter, where a majority of the applicants received it within the first 20 days, while a few of them took 40 days or more. Next, these applicants received their BIL just like the rest of the months, which is about 1 to 2 days in advance of receiving their essay letter. Moving on to the medicals, the data reveals that only half of the applicants have received their medical request so far, and that also within 1 to 5 days of receiving their biometric request letter, with a few exceptions of plus 50 days, while the other half applicants are still waiting for it. Talking about the application transfer stage, about 1/3 of the applications submitted in July have not been transferred over to their respective visa offices yet, and the ones which did took well over 40 days in advance. That means their applications were transferred around 40 days before the applicants received their medicals request. And just like the previous month, very few of them actually received an AOR2 email from CSE that their application has been properly received. Now talking about the pre-arrival stage, since a lot of applicants didn't receive their AOR2, they actually received their pre-arrival letter within 30 to 60 days from the day their application went into background check. But again, not a lot of the July applicants have reached this stage as of yet, with most of them still stuck at the AOR2 stage. After that, only a handful of the applicants who received their pre-arrival were able to see a passport request in their account, while some directly got their PPR without a pre-arrival. But please note, just like the previous 2 months, a very large proportion of this month's applications are still not finalized and stuck at one or the other process. Now let's talk about the August applicants. So for this month, mostly all the applicants received their first AOR on an average of 65 days, which is similar to the previous month's data. Later on, after that, the sponsor approval stage took an additional 20 to 40 days, with the average being 24 days. Further moving to the next stage, almost all the applicants received their biometrics instruction letter up to 3 days in advance of receiving their essay letter. Basically, all the applications in the data so far had received their biometrics request, but further ahead, things seem to have slowed down a little bit. Talking about the medical stage, around 35 to 40% of the people in the data had received their medicals request letter so far, and that also within 1 to 5 days after biometrics. The rest of the applicants are still waiting for it. The same thing is going on with the application transfer stage, with a few applicants having their files moved to their respective visa offices a couple days after either the biometrics or the medicals request, while some taking as long as 80 to 100 days. But relatively, the proportion of such applications is still very low, which means that there are still a huge number of August applicants waiting to move to this stage. Talking about the AOR2, surprisingly, only one applicant out of my data of 100 applicants received an AOR2 email. Now, speaking about the pre-arrival stage, again, only a handful of applicants have received this letter, and that also within 20 to 30 days from the day their file was moved. However, none of these applicants have received a passport request yet, which means not a single August application has been approved as of yet, based on the data of 100 applicants. Looking at the previous month's data, there is not much that we can really talk about September. However, talking about the first AOR, the numbers are pretty good with taking an average time of 68 days. However, 99% of these applications have not moved any further. Why 99%? Well, it's just an estimate because I only have one September applicant in my data who has been able to reach the medical stage within 2 months from the day their application got delivered. But we cannot really rely on this one single data, right? Hence, we come to an end of our speculations. But hold on. So just to make a conclusion of this whole video, I can say that things have started to slow down a little bit from the month of July. The reason could either simply be the delay from the CIC's end, or maybe not a lot of months have passed by since July, which is why we are not seeing a lot of results right now. Whatever the actual situation is, we will really come to know about it in the upcoming months. At this point of time, what I can suggest you all is to compare your timeline with the one provided in this video and kind of have an idea of where your application should be sitting right now. If the timeline looks comparatively similar, then good for you, or else make sure you're following up with CIC. That might help giving your application a little bit of boost. And let me know in the comments below what month did you apply your spousal sponsorship file for, as well as your processing timeline, so others can get informed as well. Also, if you're enjoying my video so far and would like me to come up with even more of such videos, then let me know what should be the topic of my next video. This video was presented as per the request made by my viewers, and so will be the upcoming ones. And to support this channel, please give this channel a subscribe and big thumbs up button if you liked it. I'll see you again with another video on your very own Canadian Desi. Signing out.